Hey, there, it's me, Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access. Link in the comment, thanks. Neither Sarah nor I ever knew Randy Rollins very well. Nobody else did either. So maybe it shouldn't have been surprising that this ordinary face in the crowd at Fort Russell High would kill himself one March morning when the signs of spring were making the rest of us feel hopeful. We can't be sure it was suicide. Maybe it wasn't. But he drove his old rusty gray Chevette off a mountain curve fast enough and in enough of a straight line that it seemed he wasn't trying to brake or steer. Just go over the edge and down into the rocks of the canyon hundreds of feet below. Randy had been depressed, some kids said. And the last entry in his journal, open on the dresser, was a note that his mom found, "Don't blame yourself. It's not your fault." Was it a suicide note intended to comfort his mom, or just a note to himself? I guess we'll never know. In spite of the counselors they dragged in, almost everybody at school seemed depressed and guilty. Some cracked jokes, but there was a nervous edge to their laughs, and no one laughed with them. I asked my good friend Rick, "What do you think about Randy?" "At least the poor kid's getting some attention now," Rick responded. "Not that he's around to enjoy it. I woke up from a dream last night, dreaming that I was in that old bomb of a car, sailing through the air. I woke up all sweaty and yelping." "So why do you think he did it, if he did it?" I asked. "Lonely. Hopeless. Frightened," Rick slowly said. "Frightened? Why?" I was puzzled. Because he had feelings, gay feelings, and they frightened him. He knew if he expressed those feelings that he would go from being ignored to being despised. Rick's jaw tightened as he talked. "Gay, you weren't, I started to say. As far as I knew, only Sarah and I knew Rick's sexual preference." "No." Rick almost shouted. Then he calmed down. "I wasn't attracted to him, and he hardly knew me. He did try to come on to one guy, a school dropout, and got punched out. Maybe he was afraid that guy would tell everybody, I don't know. Anyway, it's very lonely in a town like this not to be able to live like you were meant to live. There are a few other gay and lesbian students here, and we kind of watch out for each other, but that doesn't help the loners like Randy." I knew from previous talk that Rick planned to stay closeted, at least until he could leave town. He wasn't sure yet whether he would go to the state university with us, or would move to a larger city. We were both alone in our thoughts. Then he looked at me and asked, "Mark, if I was outed, before your wedding, would you still be my friend, out in public, Would you still want me in your wedding?" "Absolutely, bud," I said, looking straight in his eyes. "And if I were out as Annie and people recognized me, and I got beat up, or just blabbed about, would you be there for me?" "Absolutely, bud," he said. Then he smiled. "There's one dress you have that's pretty tacky, though, that pink one from Julie's aunt." I knew the frilly little girlish one he meant. "I would be a bit embarrassed at your fashion sense if you wore that one in public, whether you were outed or not." "That's okay, so would I." Sarah Beth's spirits had improved greatly over the past month. She was bubbly, witty, and funny again. I hadn't spent any major time as Annie since our trip, but every now and then Sarah would look at me appraisingly. She might comb my hair over a bit and slip a couple of barrettes in, or find an old shell of Julie's that she'd have me try on to see how the color looked on me. Now, with Randy's death, she was quiet and sad-looking. I asked if she wanted to talk about it, like I had with Rick, and she would just shake her head a tiny bit, and give me a half-hearted smile, then look the other way. About 2 weeks after the death, Sarah asked me, "Are you doing anything Saturday afternoon?" "I'm scheduled to work at the bike shop, but I could trade off." "Do it." I want to go somewhere with you, she announced. Me or Annie? You. Mark. My fiancé. Dress grubby. Eat a big lunch. I'll pack some nibbles. She didn't sound happy, but she did sound determined. That was better than depressed. I agreed and made the trade-off. Around 3 that Saturday afternoon, I swung by to pick her up. She lifted herself up onto the seat and used her hands to pull her right leg into the car. The inside of her shoe scraped across the door frame. I'll have to lift higher, she murmured, or trash all my shoes. Then she turned, smiled the smile that lights up the world, and said, "A great day, huh?" I agreed. "Where to, milady?" "Your wish is my command." I nodded my head. "Canyon Road, please, Sir Mark," she smiled. Her eyes weren't smiling. They looked determined. She had an agenda, and this wasn't going to be just a fun cruise on a beautiful early spring day. As we left town heading west, I wondered for a moment if she wanted to see where Randy had ended his life. She wasn't much into morbid curiosity, so I buried the thought. The brown foothills were showing splotches of green and bright colors following yesterday's rain. The sun glistened off of the ore streaks in some of the rocks and rock walls along the way. The road climbed away from the lower canyon up to our lookout. We hadn't been there, or been past there, since the other bright spring day, almost a year ago, when we biked up. Sarah hadn't biked back. I felt too awkward to say anything about it. "Pull in at the overlook, please," she said. We had loved this place before the accident. Looking east, the foothills rolled down toward the plains. Fort Russell was spread around the river. Looking west, the Rocky Mountains rose above us. It was such a great spot just to sit and watch the cloud shadows glide across the terrain. There were 1 or 2 other cars in the lot. Sarah asked that I park near the outcropping where we had sat last spring. What memories, what demons, were this fragile but incredibly strong young woman planning to meet here? Sarah walked past the picnic table where I thought she would have stopped to the outcropping, right to the part where we had sat a year ago. The ledge was a little over 3 feet high. "Mark, I'm afraid you'll have to help me up this time," she said, with a sad little smile. Leaning on me for balance, she raised her left foot into a crevice, and was able to lift herself up. I helped her balance, turn, and sit, handed her cane up to her, and then I scooted up beside her. "Memories, huh?" I asked, to show her I was open to listen if she wanted to talk. "Yeah, all kinds." A pause. "Let's just sit here for a while, okay?" So we did, for quite a while. According to the school counselor, we're both introverts, and we can be comfortable with just being together in silence. I laid my hand on hers. The other cars left. I leaned over and kissed her cheek. She squeezed my hand and smiled. She looked out over the valley again. A tear trickled down the side of her nose. Then another. Then more. Then she leaned over and started sobbing deeply. I put my arm around her shoulder. She gasped and breathed deeply, regaining composure. Finally she smiled, and I didn't know what to say. "It was terrible, wasn't it?" I finally said. She smiled again, a wry, sad little smile. "Yeah, it was the worst day of my life up to that point. Then came all those days of pain and fear. Even when my family was around me, I was like, so totally alone. I was just a frightened little girl when they took me into surgery to save my leg. That's okay, I thought. I can do this. There'll be a scar, I might limp a little, but I'll still be whole. Then the fever came, and I was so miserable, so out of it. I could feel my leg trying to kill me. It was the center of pain and fever. It was sending poison into the rest of me. I was still in a haze of drugs and fever, but I can see the sad, guilty look on the doctor's face when he tried to explain to me that they would have to operate again to take my leg. She paused, gulped, and went on. I just held tight for the ride. I didn't think about it much. I wasn't thinking at all. I just wanted the pain to be gone, so I told him okay, go for it. The next couple of days I was so out of it. I was vaguely aware that when I shifted weight my body didn't turn like it used to. I knew the sheet draped over me funny. I'd look down and say, oh. That's where my leg used to be. And I'd go back asleep. Then I was just coming out of it and I saw your face, with those beautiful blue eyes looking down at me, that silly smile on your face. My first thought was, will he still want me like this? And my second was, I never want to be apart from him again. Later, when I was back in my right mind again and they were talking about me going to Hope Haven, I knew deep in my heart that somehow you would be there with me. She chuckled. Then I got the idea for Annie, and you were enough of a lovesick dope to go through with it. I'd do it again in a minute, I said. That's what kind of lovesick dope I still am. That was the worst day of my life up to that point, she said softly. I nodded. But in another way it was the best day of my life. How do you figure? I asked. You mean what happened before your accident, the fun of being together, the beauty? All that, but think. If I hadn't jumped off of this ledge and my femur hadn't snapped, she was sounding like a pre-med student already, they might not have discovered the cancer until it had spread. I would have been like Wendy, like Roger, like a lot of other kids, just a memory. And it's all so beautiful. What is? Life. Okay, there's nothing of me below my right hip. Just dead weight, plastic, and hinges. But I'm alive. I can walk, sort of, anyway, I can feel the breeze on my face, see the desert flowers. Her voice shifted to a whisper. Look to your left, but don't move. My eyes shifted. On a slight rise on the ledge, a tiny tan lizard looked up at me with bright black dots for eyes, its tongue slithering in and out. We watched it in silence for a few seconds before it darted away. See what I mean? It was beautiful. It was alive. It was part of all this glory all around us. How could heaven be any better? And here we are making plans for school, for getting married, and I'm going to medical school. I never could have afforded that before. So, yeah, that was one of the best days of my life last year. And this is another one this year. I love life. I love you so much, Mark. Just as much as I love you, Sarah Beth, I said. We kissed, but broke it up when another car pulled into the parking area. When you first asked me to come up this road, I thought you were thinking about Randy. You'd seemed kind of down since that happened. I was, in a way, but not like I wanted to see where it happened. Life is so wonderful that even with all I've lost, I couldn't figure out why anyone would want to die. But I had to admit to myself that there had been times that I thought about giving up, thought that dying might be easier than living. Then sometimes I'd open my eyes and see Annie, with those silly ribbons in her hair, clattering along on her laptop with those bright blue fingernails, and I figured that I had better hang on for her sake, for your sake. And I'm so glad I did, lover mine. Like I said, I'd do it again in a minute, just to be with you. Even if I hadn't gotten to like Annie myself. Oh. I was just noticing the back of your neck. It's pretty red. She gently rubbed a pink fingernail against her neck and winced. Oh. You're right. I'm still used to having long hair, mine or my wigs, and I'm not used to having my neck bare. Beautiful neck it is, too, I leered, and kissed it appropriately. There. Does that make it feel better? As much as I loved the long, flowing curls she had lost, I liked this short and sassy cut, too. No, she grinned. But it makes the rest of me feel better. As the sun went behind the mountains, we watched their shadows lengthen across the prairie, and lights in Fort Russell became more visible. We hugged and kissed, we ate our snacks, we talked some more, and finally got back in the Jeep to go home. We stopped at DQ for cones, then she asked me to swing by the thrift store. It was still open. She soon found a broad-billed tan hat that would protect her neck on future outings. She also found a floppy, faded denim hat with embroidered flowers all around the crown. "Oh, this is so Annie," she squealed. "Let's get it for her." Annie's got a pretty good tan from all her bike riding. I started to protest, but I saw that determined look in her eyes above the grin. "But you're right. Annie will love that hat. And it'll remind her of this most beautiful of all days." Since it was dark by then, I wore the hat in the Jeep the rest of the way to Sarah's house. Please subscribe for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.